football fields, and gang territories. They share more overlap than most people realize. Quincy Promes ran cocaine shipments through one of Europe's biggest ports while scoring goals for Ajax. Adriano earned the nickname the Emperor at Inter Milan and then returned to a favela controlled by Brazil's oldest and deadliest drug gang. These aren't isolated stories. There are 10 of them. So here's how deep that overlap really goes. Quincy Promes had 50 caps for the Netherlands national team and competed at Euro 2020. He was one of Dutch football's most recognizable names, electric on the wing, prolific in front of goal, beloved in Amsterdam. He won the Russian Premier League title with Spartak Moscow and was named Footballer of the Year in Russia in 2017. By the time he pulled on the Ajax shirt for the second time, he was home. The Netherlands was his, the fan base was his, and quietly, according to Dutch prosecutors, a massive cocaine supply network was also his. The Dutch prosecution service alleged Promes had attempted to import over 1.3 metric tons of cocaine through the Antwerp port in January 2020. Not grams, not kilograms, over a ton. While he was training, playing matches, and posting on social media, the cocaine was allegedly moving through Belgium's biggest port in crates, bound for the Netherlands. The shipment had a street value of tens of millions of euros. Prosecutors didn't frame this as a footballer who got tempted into crime. They painted him as the architect. The suspect maintained a managerial role and was a financier. He worked calculatedly, was careful, and did not take too many risks. He did not get his own hands dirty. He let others do the dirty work, said prosecutors. That's not a player with bad friends. That's a man running an operation. Promes was also connected to a 55-year-old Almere man suspected of running a wide-ranging cocaine trafficking ring, a man who was also implicated in 2 street-level assassinations. This was organized crime at the highest level, not peripheral, not distant, central. Prosecutors said Dutch police had been tapping his phone since 2018, where they collated proof of him allegedly communicating about large-scale drug trafficking through encrypted messaging platforms. 2 years of surveillance, 2 years of Promes playing top-level football, giving interviews, posing for photographs, and all the while, police were listening. Promes was back playing for Ajax in 2020 when the details of his private life began to unravel. He was accused of stabbing his cousin at a family party in July of that year, a crime that stunned the footballing world. He was detained in December before being released shortly after, pending investigation, during which he pleaded innocence. The attempted murder charge was ultimately downgraded to aggravated assault. On June 19, 2023, Promes was found guilty and sentenced to 18 months of imprisonment. He wasn't in court for the verdict, he was in Moscow. Years in prison. The court specifically criticized him for flaunting wealth and trying to increase his prestige by making extra money through serious crime, noting that as a professional footballer, Promes was a role model to many. 6 years for drugs, 18 months for the stabbing. Combined, he was set to begin serving a 7.5-year prison sentence. After being released under the condition of temporarily remaining in the UAE, Promes joined Dubai United, a second division club, and just kept playing. He eventually told Dutch TV that he missed the Netherlands and would like to come back, expressing his willingness to finally cooperate and attend trial. The former Ajax and Spartak Moscow forward was arrested by Dubai police following a request from the Dutch authorities and was flown back on a private chartered jet arranged by the Dutch judiciary. After landing in the Netherlands, Promes was sent straight to a prison center where he remains under custody. The Amsterdam Court of Appeal ruled the footballer had evaded the legal process and refused to release him from custody, even temporarily. The man who once terrorized defenders across Russia, Spain, and the Netherlands, who scored 7 goals in 50 international caps, is now in a Dutch prison cell. His appeal pending, his career over. Dutch prosecutors also seized 9 houses owned by Promes in Almere, Amsterdam, Utrecht, and Abcoude following his conviction. That's the full picture. The footballer, who wasn't just linked to crime, who, according to courts, was running it. There are stories of footballers who grew up in dangerous neighborhoods and left them behind. Adriano's story runs in the opposite direction. Adriano was born in Rio de Janeiro's notorious Vila Cruzeiro favela, an uncompromising environment riddled with crime, violence, and corruption. He got out the way so many kids from those streets dream of getting out. With a football. Family members pooled money together so he could play for Flamengo's academy at the age of 7. 2 buses every day. There had never been a striker who inspired fear quite like the 6'2" Titan from Rio. He was strong, blisteringly quick, and technically brilliant, with a cannon for a left foot. Even Zlatan Ibrahimovic was left in awe of Adriano's quality. He could shoot from every angle. Nobody could tackle him. Nobody could take the ball. He was a pure animal, Ibrahimovic said. At Inter Milan, they called him the Emperor. The nickname was earned. He won 4 consecutive Serie A titles, scored 27 goals for Brazil, and terrified every defense in Europe. There was a period right around the 2004 Copa America when Adriano looked like the best striker on the planet. Full stop. Then his father died. Adriano has spoken openly about how he was consumed by depression, explaining how he went from heaven to hell in the space of just 9 days. He was across the ocean in Italy when it happened, alone. And the grief just swallowed him whole. He missed 15 Serie A games in 2006, 7 and 34 Serie A games in 2007-8, falling deep into depression and turning to alcohol. His managers, Mancini, Mourinho, tried to hold him together. It didn't stick. Eventually, he went home, not to a mansion in Ipanema, back to the favela, back to Vila Cruzeiro. Photos emerged of him shoulder to shoulder with suspected narco lords touting AK-47s. In 2010, he was suspected of having links to drug traffickers after a motorbike he allegedly purchased was used in dealing operations by a cartel local to Vila Cruzeiro. Vila Cruzeiro isn't just any favela. Police said it is ruled by the Red Command, the oldest and one of the most powerful gangs in Rio de Janeiro. Some were in the Comando Vermelho, the Red Command, one of Brazil's biggest criminal gangs. Adriano had known them since childhood, when they'd played football barefoot on the streets of Vila Cruzeiro. When he retired, the Brazilian newspaper O Globo claimed that Adriano had become a member of the oldest criminal gang in Rio de Janeiro, the Red Command. On social networks, he was seen brandishing firearms and spending a lot of time on the streets. 1 year after returning, while leaving a club with several women on Christmas Eve, he is believed to have accidentally shot one of the women in the hand after taking a gun from his bodyguard. Adriano never ended up in prison. He was never prosecuted following the shooting, while the charges brought against him over the drug trafficking allegations were ultimately dropped. He has always maintained his innocence. In a now famous essay in the Players Tribune, he wrote, "I don't do drugs as they try to prove. I'm not into crime, but of course I could have been." A man who grew up surrounded by the Red Command, who played football on the same dirt patches as men who would later carry AK-47s, who says football was his escape, and who, when that escape started to crumble, walked straight back into the world he'd come from. Nowadays, Adriano spends his time in Vila Cruzeiro, where he admits he drinks to oblivion alongside friends in the favela. "The only thing I look for in Vila Cruzeiro is peace," he told the Players Tribune. That's where the Emperor lives now. Not in a palace. In the same favela where the Red Command runs the streets. Most goalkeepers are remembered for what they saved. Rene Higuita is remembered for how he played, and for the man he couldn't say no to. Wembley, 1995, England versus Colombia. Colombia gave fans a memorable footballing moment. Goalkeeper Rene Higuita's scorpion kick versus England at Wembley in 1995. Both heels flicking up over his head to clear a shot. It's one of the most audacious pieces of skill ever seen in international football. The crowd went wild. Higuita grinned. He was untouchable, except he wasn't, because 2 years before that moment, in 1993, he was in a Colombian prison, not watching from the stands behind bars. Higuita didn't just play football in Colombia in the late 1980s and early 1990s. He played it in the shadow of Pablo Escobar. And this isn't metaphorical shadow. This is literal, documented proximity to the most powerful drug lord in history. Higuita experienced a bout with notoriety alongside his fame, his success tainted by his relationship with drug lord Pablo Escobar, a patron of football in Higuita's hometown of Medellin, to understand just how intertwined football and cartels were in that era. At his height, Escobar laundered money through Atlético Nacional, one of Colombia's premier professional teams. At least 6 professional clubs were known to be linked with drug cartels and their sordid affairs of briberies, kidnappings, and killings. 8 of the 22 players who comprised the 1990 Colombian national team played for Atlético Nacional during Escobar's reign, including Faustino Asprilla, Andres Escobar, and Higuita himself. These weren't players who had a distant, vague awareness of where some of the money came from. They played in Escobar's team, in Escobar's city, in an era where Escobar's reach extended into virtually every corner of Colombian life. Many Colombian soccer players learned how to play on those fields and grew up admiring Escobar and feeling beholden to him. And Higuita, charismatic, flamboyant, famously eccentric, took it a step further. In 1993, Higuita served a 7-month jail sentence for profiting from and working as an accessory to a kidnapping. The story as it unfolded was jaw-dropping. Escobar was at this point confined to La Catedral, his purpose-built luxury prison. Even confined to that golden cage, he still managed to control his empire. And somewhere in that empire, a kidnapping had taken place. And Higuita, Colombia's most famous goalkeeper, had become involved in the ransom negotiations. The full details have been documented in the 2010 ESPN film, The Two Escobars, which explored how deeply Colombian football's golden generation was enmeshed with the cartel world. Higuita visited Escobar in prison multiple times. He was a personal friend, and when Escobar needed someone trusted to serve as a go-between in a kidnapping, someone whose fame and football status would make him appear unthreatening, Higuita stepped in. He received payment for his role. When this came to light, the fallout was swift. 7 months behind bars. One of the most talented goalkeepers of his generation, locked up while Colombia's football world pretended it hadn't seen exactly how close the sport had been to the cartel all along. Even the manager of the national team later admitted that the injection of drug money into the system raised the caliber of Colombian soccer and prevented skilled players from going elsewhere. This wasn't a secret. Everyone knew. The cartels built the stadiums, they paid the wages. They made Colombian football competitive at an international level for the first time. Investing in Atlético Nacional allowed the drug lord to combine his billions with his lifelong passion for soccer in the ideal money laundering scheme. With Escobar supplying funds to recruit foreigners and retain the best local players, the team began to win, and it kept winning. For the first time, a Colombian soccer team was competing at the international level. And Higuita, the brilliant eccentric who swept out of his 6-yard box like a man who'd never heard the word goalkeeper, was right at the heart of all of it. His friendship with Escobar wasn't forced. It wasn't naive. He knew exactly who Pablo Escobar was. He visited him in a luxury prison, accepted money to facilitate a ransom, and spent 7 months in jail for it. He came back, of course. He made that scorpion kick happen 2 years later. He played international football into his late 30s, but the shadow never really left. René Higuita, the most entertaining goalkeeper in the history of the game, was also a man who sat across from the world's most dangerous drug lord and said yes. Every entry on this list is about a footballer connected to crime. This one is different. This one is about a criminal who played football and used the game as cover for one of the most prolific drug trafficking operations in South American history. Sebastián Marcet is a Uruguayan who played professional football in his home country, in Paraguay and in Bolivia. He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't a household name outside of South America, but he was a drug lord of staggering scale, and football was his alibi. Marcet is the first major drug trafficker to use his status and wealth not only to bankroll professional soccer teams, but to play on them. Think about that for a second. Not a cartel boss who owned a team from the boardroom. A man who physically ran onto the pitch in competitive matches while simultaneously running one of the most violent cocaine networks on the continent. Some of his games were held just miles from where he had deposited the bodies of his cartel rivals based on descriptions in his text messages. His criminal beginnings were relatively modest. His first interactions with Montevideo's criminal underworld were minor. In 2009, at 18, he was arrested for possession of stolen goods and a year later for possession of narcotics. But he made it clear he was willing to take on more risk. When he was 22, he accepted a job receiving a marijuana shipment scheduled to arrive in rural Uruguay on a small plane from Paraguay. Normally an assignment for a team of men, but the traffickers by then trusted him to receive it alone. That trust grew into something far bigger. Marcet worked his way up through the criminal hierarchy with the same relentlessness that, on the surface, he was applying to his football career. By the time international agencies became aware of his true profile, he had become one of the most wanted men in South America. A fugitive operating across multiple continents, maintaining his professional footballer status as both a financial vehicle and a layer of social legitimacy. And the football connection isn't incidental, it's central. In the early 2000s, an associate of El Chapo named Martinez spent millions moving drugs to purchase several Mexican soccer teams. His nickname after his arrest revealed it all: El Futbolista. But Marcet went further. He didn't just buy teams, he played on them. This is arguably the most audacious criminal use of football ever documented. While investigators in multiple countries were building cases against him, Marcet was taking corners, pressing high, tracking back, performing every ritual of professional football, all the while directing cocaine shipments, ordering violence, and moving money across South American borders. The case of Sebastian Marcet is a reminder that the overlap between football and organized crime isn't always a player from a tough neighborhood who got pulled back in. Sometimes it runs in the completely opposite direction, a career criminal who used football as the world's most elaborate disguise. Robinho was supposed to be the next Ronaldo, the Brazilian who dribbled like water, flowing around defenders, unpredictable, dazzling. He was eventually sentenced to 9 years in prison for participating in a gang rape in Milan. But to understand how Robinho got to that courtroom, you need to understand where he came from and what he never fully escaped. Robson de Souza, Robinho, grew up in Santos, Brazil, specifically in a neighborhood where organized crime and poverty shaped almost every young life around him. He was spotted by Santos FC as a teenager and became the club's most celebrated prodigy in a generation. The same fame and financial fortune that helps players escape the ghetto contributes to bringing them down, especially for success stories with gang backgrounds. Robinho's talent carried him to Real Madrid, Manchester City, AC Milan, and 4 Copa America tournaments with Brazil. He was genuinely one of the best players on earth for a period in the mid-2000s. On the ball, he was sensational, but off it, he moved through life with a sense of untouchability, a sense that the rules that applied to others simply didn't apply to him. In January 2013, at a nightclub in Milan, a 22-year-old Albanian woman was sexually assaulted. Robinho and 5 other men were accused. The Italian investigation was long, tortuous, and contested. Robinho denied everything. His lawyers disputed everything, but the Italian courts were not persuaded. He was convicted, and convicted again on appeal. His sentencing could not be enforced immediately under Italian law, pending the appeal process. For years, he avoided the Italian sentence by simply returning to Brazil, which had no extradition treaty with Italy at the time. He continued playing. He continued living freely. The Brazilian legal system's own wheels eventually turned, though, and Brazilian courts took up the case themselves, acknowledging the Italian conviction. What makes Robinho's case connect to organized criminal behavior isn't just the attack itself, it's the structure around it. The sense of collective immunity. The group dynamic of powerful men who move together through nightclubs, through parties, through the underbelly of Italian nightlife, believing collectively that their status put them beyond consequence. That structure, the entourage, the group mentality, the shared understanding that the rules don't apply, is precisely what defines organized criminality at its most social form. Football gave Robinho everything. It took him out of Santos, put him in the Bernabeu, gave him the City of Manchester Stadium, and it gave him the cover of fame that for years kept him out of a cell. Faustino Asprilla was one of the most electric footballers to ever wear a Premier League shirt. The Colombian who arrived at Newcastle in 1996 and immediately made everything more dangerous, more unpredictable, more alive. He was chaos in football boots. And off the pitch, the chaos followed him everywhere. Asprilla was one of 8 players who made up the 1990 Colombian national team while playing for Atlético Nacional during Pablo Escobar's reign. Like Higuita, he was embedded in a club that the Medellin cartel directly funded and controlled. Escobar ran Atlético Nacional as an open secret, funneling his proceeds from the drug trade to acquire, develop, and retain the best soccer talent he could find. This means Asprilla's early professional career, his development, his wages, the facilities he trained in, was financed by the most powerful drug cartel in history. The players at that club existed inside the orbit of Escobar's empire. Many Colombian soccer players grew up admiring Escobar and feeling beholden to him. Asprilla has been refreshingly candid about this world over the years. He has spoken in interviews about growing up in a Colombia where the cartel's influence was inescapable, where the fields you played on, the boots you wore, the clubs that gave you a career were all touched by drug money. It wasn't a world you could simply opt out of. His post-football life, though, is what really illustrates the difficulty of leaving that world behind. After retiring, Asprilla was arrested in Colombia on weapons charges, specifically for the illegal possession of a firearm. He was found in possession of a weapon without the appropriate licenses. The Colombian courts processed the case. He avoided significant prison time, but the incident reinforced what so many who knew the Colombian game of that era already understood. The culture of armed violence that ran through the cartel world had seeped into everything around it, including the lives of the footballers who lived and worked within its reach. Asprilla's story is ultimately less about personal criminality and more about the impossibility of escaping context. He came from a Colombia where the narco-football era had made Escobar's cartel the shadow patron of the entire sport. The two, football and cocaine, were linked very closely, and for a time Colombia's on-the-field success was so blatantly linked to the country's drug cartels that the period became known as Colombia's narco-football. Faustino Asprilla dazzled Newcastle, Parma, and the world. He scored that hat-trick against Barcelona in the Champions League. He was, for stretches, a genuinely transcendent talent. He also grew up, trained, and built his career inside one of the most ruthless criminal networks in human history. And the fingerprints of that world never fully washed off. Most people outside of Scotland have never heard of Paul McDonald. He played for Heart of Midlothian, Hearts at youth level. He represented Scotland youth teams. He was a footballer on a trajectory that looked, from the outside, fairly promising. What the outside didn't see was that McDonald was building a second career alongside his football one. A career that, by the time Scottish police finally closed the net, had reached an almost unimaginable scale. In November 2023, a former Scotland youth team footballer who turned to serious organized crime was jailed for 7 years. After being convicted of running a massive drug trafficking operation, ex-Hearts player Paul McDonald, then 35, hid thousands of pounds in drugs money at safe houses in Glasgow, and told accomplices in encrypted text messages that he could make £1.9 million a month from buying and selling cocaine. This was the senior management of a criminal empire. In one message, he claimed he and co-accused Craig Balloch would still get £1 million after bills are paid. There were bills, there were overheads, there was infrastructure. McDonald wasn't talking about a street corner operation. He was talking about a business. When police officers searched a property connected to the network in April 2020, they discovered 444,560 hidden in bags, envelopes, and packages, while 146,750 was found at a second property. Nearly £600,000 in physical cash, hidden across multiple properties. This is what a high-ranking drug operation looks like when its walls close in. Both men were set to be made the subject of confiscation orders under proceeds of crime legislation. The Crown wanted every penny back. McDonald's case is significant because it strips away any mystique about what kind of player gets involved in organized crime at this level. He wasn't a global star with a massive entourage and the temptations of elite wealth. He was a former youth player, someone who'd had a taste of what professional football could offer, who'd seen the gap between that life and the one available to him after football ended, and who made a choice. A catastrophic, calculated, multi-year choice to build a criminal organization from the ground up. The football career that never fully arrived. The criminal career that ended in a Scottish courtroom. Paul McDonald is one of the clearest examples on this list of a footballer who didn't just stumble into crime, who ran it. Marlon King spent his career being one of the most talented lower to mid-tier strikers in English football, a physical, dangerous forward who could produce moments of real quality. He also spent most of that career building what amounted to an impressive criminal record. A brilliant striker with a lot of promise after a cracking breakout season at Watford, fame and excess quickly caught up with him. Over the course of his career, King was charged with 14 separate offenses, the first of which came in 1997 while at Dulwich Hamlet when he wounded an opposing player, fracturing his cheekbone with a headbutt and a punch. 14 offenses? That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. The charges accumulated across years and across clubs: assault, dangerous driving, robbery, sexual assault. King served prison sentences on multiple occasions. And what makes his case particularly relevant here isn't any single charge. It's the sustained, structured nature of his criminal behavior alongside his football career. He wasn't just a footballer who made mistakes, he was someone who moved through English football with one foot always in a criminal world. The most serious incident came in 2009. King was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman at a nightclub and breaking her nose when she rejected him. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was playing for Birmingham City at the time. The club terminated his contract, but King kept getting clubs. He kept getting chances. Sheffield United, Coventry, Middlesbrough. Even after the prison sentence, the offers kept coming because the goals kept going in, and English football has an uncomfortable habit of prioritizing the latter over the former. What distinguishes King on this list is the depth of criminal network he moved through. Multiple robbery charges, not solitary incidents, but connected behavior that placed him within circles where serious violence and theft were organized activities, not isolated eruptions of rage. He is, in many ways, the English football equivalent of the same story told across this entire video. A man with extraordinary physical gifts who spent his career moving between the football pitch and the criminal world, never fully choosing one over the other. El Hadji Diouf was one of the most controversial players in Premier League history. Not because of anything on the pitch. He was good on the pitch, genuinely good. A Liverpool signing off the back of a World Cup in which he was one of Senegal's standout performers. The controversy was always elsewhere: the spitting incidents, the fines, the suspensions, the constant battles with officials, opponents, and teammates. Diouf was someone who seemed to carry conflict with him wherever he went, and the trail he left behind in English football was long and turbulent. Diouf grew up in Dakar, Senegal, in conditions of serious poverty. The streets he came from weren't gentle ones. He arrived in Europe carrying that hardness, and he never shed it. That toughness made him formidable on the pitch, and extremely difficult to manage off it. In 2010, Diouf was involved in a serious road rage incident in which he reportedly threatened the other driver at the roadside. Police were called, charges were considered. The incident was serious enough to result in court proceedings. Beyond individual incidents, Diouf became associated in the reporting of Scottish and English police investigations with individuals from organized criminal networks. The specific details of those connections were never fully aired in open court, partly because Diouf himself was never charged with organized criminality directly. But the pattern of behavior, the repeated violent incidents, the associations, the aggression that exceeded anything that could be written off as footballers' bravado, pointed consistently toward a man who existed at the intersection of professional sport and criminal culture in a way that his teammates and clubs found, at different points, genuinely alarming. He is remembered by Liverpool fans for being a disappointment. He is remembered by Blackburn, Bolton, and Sunderland fans for flashes of brilliance and constant drama. He deserves to be remembered, too, as someone whose story illustrates how easily football's veneer of respectability can sit on top of something far less comfortable. There is no more complicated figure in football history than Diego Maradona, the greatest player of his generation, many would say of all time. A man of astonishing, almost supernatural gifts, and a man whose relationship with organized crime ran from his earliest professional years to very nearly his last breath. Maradona's link to the Camorra, Naples' powerful ancient crime syndicate, is one of the most documented and least discussed secrets in football. When he arrived at Napoli in 1984, it wasn't just a football club he was joining. Naples in the 1980s was a city in the grip of the Camorra. The syndicate had infiltrated every layer of Neapolitan life: business, politics, the local economy. Football was no different. And Maradona, young, electric, desperate to be loved, a man who had always found family in the streets, walked straight into their embrace. The Camorra didn't just fund some of Napoli's operations, they provided Maradona with his social world: parties, Women, cocaine. The city's most powerful criminals became, in effect, his hosts, his companions, his protectors. Pablo Escobar, while in captivity, invited Diego Maradona to play a friendly match with Colombia's top players. The game was followed by late-night festivities, and Maradona departed the following day with a handsome, undisclosed fee. He was comfortable in those rooms. He knew exactly what those men did. The cocaine addiction that destroyed the second half of his career began in Naples, in the parties hosted by the Camorra, with products supplied by the Camorra, in a cycle of dependency that his hosts were not interested in helping him break. By the time Napoli authorities began investigating, they found Maradona's name in Camorra wiretaps. He was discussing cocaine, he was discussing debts, he was, by any investigative standard, embedded in the criminal network of the city he'd made his football home. He left Naples in 1992, under the cloud of a failed drug test and a paternity scandal. The Italian courts were building a case against him for cocaine possession for association with the Camorra. He fled to Argentina. The case didn't fully follow him, partly because Maradona's legal exposure in Italy was one of the most politically sensitive issues in Neapolitan culture. Prosecuting Maradona would have torn that city apart. In later years, the full depth of the Camorra connection became impossible to deny. Testimonies from former Camorra members placed Maradona at the center of social gatherings that were, in reality, the social infrastructure of organized crime. He wasn't a peripheral figure at those gatherings. He was the guest of honor. And then there was his relationship with Escobar's world. The visit to La Catedral, Escobar's luxury prison. It all took place at La Catedral, Escobar's purpose-built luxury prison that featured a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and a waterfall. That visit has often been discussed in terms of Maradona's naivety, as if he simply didn't know where he was or who he was with. Nobody who has looked at the man's life seriously believes that. Maradona knew. He'd spent years in Naples absorbing the rhythms and the culture of organized crime. He understood what rooms like that meant. Diego Maradona was the greatest footballer of his generation. He was also someone who spent decades operating at the very highest levels of two worlds, professional football and organized crime, without ever being held fully accountable for the second. His genius was real. His criminal associations were equally real. And his story is perhaps the most revealing on this list because it shows how far those associations can reach, from the Camorra's grip on Naples to the cocaine lord's luxury prison in the Colombian mountains. When you are the most famous footballer on the planet, and nobody wants to ask the questions that most need asking,